Only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is graphical application development using Corona SDK. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Altaf Rehmani, founder and director at Red Byte Software. With over 15 years in IT financial services in various roles, Altaf brings in the technical passion combined with his enthusiasm to some of the hottest trends in IT, including business intelligence and mobile learning. He founded Red Byte Software in 2009 when he returned home to India from Hong Kong. Altaf is passionate and enthusiastic about technology solutions, its impact on the consumer life, and is currently enjoying leading the technology team producing educational apps for mobile devices. A member of various social and charity causes, he is inspired to bridge the gap between academia and industry expectations. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker, Mr. Altaf Rehmani. Over to you, Mr. Rehmani.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I've just shared my screen, so I hope all of you can see the screen. Okay, so today's session is about graphical apps and game development using the Corona SDK. My name is Altaf Rehmani, and I spent 13 years of my career doing investment banking IT, after which I founded Red Byte Software in 2009. And in 2011, we essentially transformed our entire company to do mobile app development full-time using this wonderful SDK. So today I'm going to share you some of the features, strengths, weaknesses, and experiences of our team using the Corona SDK. Quick background, 15 years financial services IT, followed by 3 years of startup experience. So this is my 4th product startup. And I continue to learn every day. It's been an exciting journey, very fulfilling journey so far. What we do as a company is we do educational apps for kids on the mobile platform. We believe that mobile devices will have a major impact on which kids of tomorrow will learn certain subjects. And we target and focus on 2 to 6 year age group and create apps for toddlers. My Twitter is Altafar and my Facebook.com Altafar. Before we did mobile apps, our company did 3 other products. U-Shops, online shopping for niche products, Dash 2.0, the dashboard for retailers, and an online testing platform for technical recruiters. Okay, before I jump into the Corona SDK and the features, I just want to put some figures up there to give you an idea of how big the app economy is. So from the figures we have found, and we know that it's very difficult to find figures as far as Asia is concerned, but in the US alone, the app economy has produced more than 500,000 jobs. If you look at the number of apps, Apple alone has more than 600,000 apps in the App Store, exceeding 25 billion downloads. Android has over 300,000 apps, and Gartner is predicting that by 2015, we'll have a total of 185 billion downloads just from the various app stores. From a money perspective, 2011 was dominated by Apple, so 85% of the revenue went to Apple from apps, and they ended up paying out $6 billion to developers. And by 2015, analysts are predicting that developers will take away more than $25 billion. So this is a considerable market and opportunity for companies and developers out there. Just look at the number of devices. Apple alone is selling 20 million iOS devices every month. So if you add to the Android figures, this figure becomes quite substantial. And because of the centralized nature of app stores, every person who buys a new device goes to the App Store to get apps. So if you have a good app which is either featured or an app which can spread virally, you have the probability of getting that visibility from all these millions of people who are going to the App Store to get apps for the new devices. In the Apple iOS platform alone, you have over 75 apps per device. That's the average number of apps per device. Moving on, we created a brand called Tiny Taps and started doing toddler apps 11 months ago. 11 months fast forward, we have around 34 applications now live on the App Store, the Google Play Market, and the Amazon Kindle Market. So I'm going to start the discussion around Corona SDK. So really, before we go into what is Corona, we stumbled upon Corona looking for a cross-platform solution to develop apps. So when we began, my team had 5 people, and they were mostly from .NET backgrounds, 6 months to 2 years of experience in .NET. And one of the things we realized is the difference in platforms between Android and iOS. So not only you have to learn 2 different languages, but it's also the nuances of the 2 different platforms which you would have to learn if you were going all the way native. Plus, given the fact that we didn't necessarily want to maintain 2 skill sets in 2 different code bases, we wanted something which could be write once and deploy to multiple platforms. So we spent around a month, 2 months looking at all the various SDKs out there. And we had already decided from a strategy point of view to develop for kids in the education sector, in the educational sector. And that's when during our research we stumbled upon Corona SDK. It's been a wonderful journey so far. It's a solid SDK. We exclusively focus on this SDK today. Even though we have people who know native Java, can do native Android applications, we also have people who do Objective-C, but we continue to use Corona SDK for our toddler apps. So what is Corona? Corona is a cross-platform, cross-development mobile SDK from a company called Ansa Mobile. Ansa Mobile is a Palo Alto-based company founded by 2 ex-adobe engineers. What does this SDK do? It helps or empowers developers like us to write games and graphical applications for both iOS and Android platform quickly and easily. Corona produced apps have been downloaded a number of times. There have been a lot of success stories with Corona produced apps. Not only that, these apps work for the various enhanced versions of Android, which means you're talking about these apps working on the Nook platform. These apps also work on the Amazon Kindle devices, and of course on other Android and iOS devices. Corona SDK is not open source. It is not free either. You have to pay price of $350 US, $349 to be precise, $349 US to be able to publish apps to the app stores. There is a free trial version available which is free forever, and you can very well develop your complete application in that using that free trial version, and you can deploy it to your own device. But the moment you have to deploy it to the app store, you have to buy the license. Okay, so I'll be answering all the questions towards the end of my presentation. Thank you. Okay, success stories. So using the Corona SDK, a young boy named Robert May created this game called Bubble Ball. It was quite a sensation. Bubble Ball was a free app. It received more than 7 million downloads. An app called Float that crawl space games received approximately 1 million downloads. This game took 1 day to prototype and 2 months to develop. Blast Monkeys, another similar game available both on iOS and Android, got more than 300,000 downloads. It was created in 14 days. Finally, Joe Kaufman of Fire Maple Games. They've made 2 games so far, clocked over more than 3.5 million downloads and 1 million in revenue. And how many people work for this company? 1. That's Joe Kaufman. He outsources all the design work to his friend. So technically, they are a 2-person company. The 2-person company has done more than 1 million in revenue and over 3.5 million downloads. So these and more are some of the success stories using the Corona SDK. So what is this SDK about? From a technical perspective, this SDK is nothing but a Lua interpreter. So you got this scripting language called Lua, which you use to write your code using the APIs provided by the Corona SDK. This API interfaces with both openGL and openAl. So openGL is the open graphics library, which can use the capabilities of the hardware to render the graphics on the device, and openAl library, which takes care of the audio functions. OpenGL and openAl are both used by iOS as well as the Android operating systems. There is a physics engine built into the Corona SDK, which is built around Box2D. So this physics engine makes it easier to write games. So things like simulating gravity, detecting collisions, motion of objects, velocity, applying force to the object, all this becomes very simple with the physics engine. Finally, the SDK produces native code. So what that means is, at the end of the day, what you get as an executable or as a APK or IPA or .app file is an actual binary expected by the respective platform. So it is by no means a second-class citizen. It's a first-class citizen. You get a true binary either for iOS or for the Android operating system. Okay, so this is what the SDK is from a technical perspective. Very high-level overview. Now, these are some of the features supported by the SDK, and this is not the complete list, just a very high-level bird's-eye view. So this SDK obviously supports graphics and drawing. So you can render images, transparent images. You can draw different shapes, you can draw vectors on the screen. It's very good at handling events, has the concept of timers, supports animation, 2 or 3 ways of doing animation. It's got complete out-of-the-box support for physics engine. It can access all your hardware capabilities of the mobile device. So for example, accelerometer, gyroscope, camera, all these hardware features can be accessed by the SDK. It's very good in doing audio and video. It's got support for ads, it's got support for notifications, data and networking. It supports data, it supports networking. So you can do your web service calls or REST API calls. You can parse the results from these calls either using XML or using JSON. You can download files, you can do all the networking stuff using the SDK. And it's also got support for location awareness, maps, etc. So pretty much broadly whatever you would need to build your apps, it's already built into the SDK. So what do we love about the SDK? So this is based on our experience. One, I think the first and foremost feature is the huge productivity gain. So not only is the learning curve short, and you can quickly learn the Lua language and a very simple to use API, because you can learn it quickly and you can use the powerful simulator, and because it's an interpreted language, it makes you really productive. So for those who are familiar with Visual Basic or VB Script, Visual Basic for example, wherein you could actually do things very quickly and see the output, Lua and Corona SDK offer a similar environment. So hugely productive, allows you to develop and write code once, but deploy for both iOS and Android platforms. It's got an extremely simple and effective development environment, as well as workflow. It has a very helpful and active community built around the Corona SDK. So if you go to the Answer mobile website and you go to the forums, you get a lot of experienced people, people from the Answer mobile staff. They're there willing to help you. There are other people who have written lots of apps and willing to assist you in any kind of technical query or problem where you might be stuck. So extremely helpful and active community surrounding the SDK. The API also keeps on expanding. So obviously, as Google and Apple keep on enhancing the SDKs and keep on coming up with newer versions of the SDK, Corona SDK, the Answer mobile team does their best to keep up with, including some of the most important and more requested features, most requested feature from the developers, and they build that into the SDK pretty quickly. In fact, they have a daily build process wherein if you are a licensed subscriber, then you get a build almost every day. You get a new build of the SDK every day. As mentioned before, they have support for physics. There are lots of other frameworks, free, open source, or paid, available for Corona SDK. And there's tons of sample code. So every popular app out there, there's a sample code written in Corona SDK for that popular app. So Fruit Ninja, Angry Birds, Snooker, Ice Hockey. So these are some of the names. Tiny Wings. There are sample apps doing a clone of all these apps. So these are wonderful just to learn the SDK. And a number of third-party tools. So a number of companies have started writing tools for the Corona SDK. Not only that, there is a well-defined migration path if you're moving from Flash to Corona. So if you're a Flash developer, one, you'll find Lua and Corona SDK very similar to ActionScript. Two, if you have a lot of animations and if you have a lot of assets created in Flash, then there are tools out there which will take those animations and spit out Lua code, which will work with the Corona SDK. So these are some of the things which we love about the SDK. Okay, so productivity. I just want to quickly demonstrate what I mean by productivity. So let's look at some code. Let's look at some code. To display a simple background on a mobile device. I hope you guys can see my screen. Hello, can somebody confirm you can see my screen?
Yes, Mr. Amani, we can see your screen. It's visible.
Okay, great. You can see the browser, right?
It's visible.
Okay, so I've opened up a HTML file which actually compares what it takes to draw a simple image on a mobile screen. And on the right hand side, I have code written in Objective-C. The purpose of this code is to display an image. The image is called myimage.png. And I'm scrolling through the right hand side now. You can see that in Objective-C, if not right, I at least have to understand almost 300 lines of code just to be able to draw an image on the device. Of course, 70% of this code will be generated by Xcode, but if I need to debug, I still need to understand this code. And on the left-hand side, I have the code required in the Corona SDK. It's just one single line to load and render the image on the screen. Okay. Similarly, if I'm doing Android, then in Java, you are talking about at least 100 lines of code to display the image, background image on the screen. So just pulled up a browser page showing you the Java code on the right hand side. And it's the same line of code on the left hand side in Corona SDK. Okay. So it is a highly productive environment, and it's an environment which essentially reminds me of the initial days when I saw Visual Basic personally. So just like some of us here, maybe I started coding in C. And I know that to display a window in C, it's pretty much standard 35 to 40 lines of code. When you do the initialization, create a window, get the handle to the window, and then run a message loop to initialize the incoming messages, handling of the messages for that window. And the day I saw Visual Basic, when I didn't have to write a single line of code to display a window on the screen, I dropped C and I became a Visual Basic fan. I spent almost my entire 12 to 13-year career doing Visual Basic. So I think I got the same feeling and the same empowerment of productivity when I saw the Corona SDK for the first time. Really, really productive, really powerful. Okay, so let's talk about the simple and effective development workflow that the Corona SDK provides. Put simply, every folder you create on your file system becomes a project. So if you want to start up a new project, all you have to do is create a folder. Now, everything you put inside the folder becomes your asset for the project. All your images, sound files, JSON, XML files, anything you want to keep within the project goes into your folder, and that compiles as an asset into your app. The starting point for code is a special file called main.lua. So all the code files have extension .lua, and your application starts from main.lua. That's the entry point. You can use any code editor of your choice. It doesn't tie you down to any particular IDE. You can use Text Wrangler, BBEdit, Xcode, or even Notepad++. There are sophisticated IDEs available for Lua and Corona SDK. Few of them are free, most of them are paid in the range of $15 to $70. And they provide you with all the goodies like syntax highlighting, autocomplete, step-by-step tracing, debugging. And then So you can go as sophisticated as using an IDE with all the features if you're used to Visual Studio or Xcode or any other sophisticated IDE, or you can go as simple as using a Notepad++. And Notepad++ has plugins which are created for Corona SDK and Lua. So you can have your simple keyword highlighting, etc. done even within Notepad++. You can do the development both on Windows and Mac. So that's another plus point. You don't necessarily need to have Macs or Windows only. This does not work on Linux. It works only on Windows and Mac. However, to be able to compile for iOS, you would have to be on a Mac. So you could develop on Windows and you can use the simulator on Windows. And you can look at the iPad and iPhone simulator, but in order to compile for those devices, you need to have that SDK installed. So obviously you need to be on a Mac. So the advantage of being on a Mac is you can compile either for iOS or for Android. Now, one of the unique things about the SDK is that the compilation does not happen locally. What that means is, when you compile, your code and your assets are sent to the Answer mobile server. And during compile time, all these assets then get magically transformed into a native app. So at runtime, and that's the proprietary technology which Answer Mobile is charging you a license for. What they do is at runtime they inject the right kind of libraries, the native libraries, and create the executable, a binary for you. Okay, so what is the SDK really good at? This SDK is really, the strength of this SDK, sorry, the strength of this SDK is really focused on creating graphical rich apps. So for example, if you're creating a 2D game with lots of animation, characters, scoring, scrolling, then this is a very good SDK, very strong and powerful SDK to use. If you are creating a kids application with lots of graphics, interactivity, sound, animation, which is what RedBytes does, then this is a very good SDK to use. Some companies are also using this SDK simply for the sake of prototyping. There are companies who use either Objective-C or Java to develop the production application, but they use Corona SDK for rapid prototyping because it's such a productive environment. So in general, this SDK is good at creating graphical rich apps or games. Okay, I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to talk about the limitations of this SDK now. When we say this SDK supports Android, it supports only Android 2.2 or higher. Not only that, it only supports a certain family of processors, the one with ARM v7. So for those in the know, the entire mobile industry is now moving towards the ARM architecture, the ARM-V architecture. So all the new mobile phones will have the ARM v7 or above processors. So this SDK or the apps produced with this SDK will not work on the very old first generation Android devices. Simply because these are graphical rich apps and you need to have certain amount of processing power in order to render graphics on the screen, which the older family of processors cannot. So these apps won't work on Android 1 and Android 2 and the older version of devices. Android push notifications is still not available. Last I checked. iOS iAds are not directly possible, but there's a workaround to get them working. Some iOS features don't work on Android, so obviously there is differences in the two platforms. Some iOS features don't work on Android yet. And lastly, when not to use this SDK. So it's very important to know when not to use something. For example, if you need native code integration and third-party toolkits integrated within your app, then it's recommended that you do not look at this SDK, because for now it does not allow this. It does not allow third-party tool integration into the environment. Lastly, if you're looking for a full-fledged business app with a lot of native UI controls targeting both platforms, then I would recommend doing your due diligence before choosing Corona SDK. So although there are business apps written with Corona SDK, when it comes to cross-platform deployment, there are certain limitations, there are certain differences. So if you're going to use a lot of native UI controls, then I would strongly recommend doing some research and prototyping before you choose this SDK. So there are obviously some limitations, and some areas which this SDK is very good at. Now there's a lot of sample code available, but Simple Pool, Ice Hockey, Fruit Ninja, Angry Birds, examples dealing with GPS, maps, Twitter, Facebook, accelerometer, gyroscope. Lots of sample code is available in the open source domain. So you can take that and you can change the graphics and you can tweak it to your own liking. So let's look at the language which is used with this SDK. Language used is Lua. Lua is now the third or fourth most popular scripting language. One of the advantages of using Lua is it's got a very small footprint. Lua is almost 100 to 110 kilobytes. So very small, has a very small footprint. Easily runs on small devices. Easily runs on small devices or in apps. In fact, Lua is 8 times smaller than JavaScript. So it's not only smaller, it's lighter, fewer things to learn. It's extremely simple to use. If you want to learn Lua, you are talking about approximately 20 keywords and 20 operators. There are only 3 or 4 data types. It's got a very powerful concept of arrays, which are called tables in Lua. And that makes it fast, even though it's interpreted, it's extremely fast. Lua is written in C, and there are lots of libraries to do a lot of other exciting things in Lua. Lua is an open source scripting language, so it's adopted by Corona SDK. It does not belong to Answer Mobile, it's an open source scripting language. Okay, so what is the Corona development process? The development process is pretty much similar to any other development process for any other platform, any other language. First and foremost, one needs to understand exactly what kind of business problem are we solving and what are we trying to do. So maybe it is solving a business problem, maybe it is automating something which is manual, maybe it is providing information, or it is entertainment. So you have to solve for something. Once you decide you want to solve a particular problem, you have to decide how you're going to solve that problem and what is the interface and how do you present the results. Once you figure that out, then it's pretty much similar to any other environment where you do your design, get your assets together, so get your images, audio, videos, animation, and then rapidly develop your apps using Lua and Corona SDK. It's an interpreted environment, so as we make changes, you can see the effects of those changes almost instantaneously. Test them on the simulator, look at the changes and make changes again till you get it right. And finally, when you're ready, you compile your application into native apps and distribute them either on the device for testing or on the App Store for distribution. Okay, what are some of the benefits to graphical app or game developers? So just note it down a list. So I'm just bringing up one by one. So again, in summary, SDK is very easy to use, extremely powerful, and it's got around 500 APIs. So if you consider that iOS alone has 5,000 APIs, simplifying this at a level of abstraction where you only have 500 APIs to know is great, because it simplifies the process to a certain extent. So you give up a bit of control, yes, but you also get a lot of things done for you and abstracted for you. You're using Lua, which is the 4th most popular scripting language, very fast, very powerful, and extremely easy to learn. You've got true ability to push to both iOS and Android platforms. Animation and sprite techniques are available. Physics engine is built out of the box. In-app purchase available for both iOS as well as for Android. For ads, even though iAds is not supported, you have support for InMobi and Papaya Mobile Network. Recently, they also added support for Interactive, which is an ad network of networks. It's a network of ad networks. So you can use Interactive and join multiple networks with Interactive. One of the features or one of the selling points of Corona SDK is it caters for dynamic content scaling as well as resolutions. So one of the challenges for mobile developers is the ability to cater for the different device sizes and the resolutions. And Corona has some configuration level settings to deal with these automatically, I should say. Complete file manipulation, XML, JSON parsing, support for SQLite, it's all built in, it's all a part of the framework. Lots of third-party and open source frameworks available from the community. So things like memory management, memory monitoring, changing scenes, all that is available as a framework if you wish to use that. Integrated with all the social tools, Twitter, Facebook, APIs, etc. And all the native device features can be accessed using this SDK. Now, what are some of the tools, third-party tools available for Corona SDK? So this is a very partial list, very initial list. There is SpriteLock, which helps convert flash animations to Corona with the click of a button. There is Quick, KWIK. Quick website is called quickshare.com, which is a Photoshop plugin to create comics and storybooks straight out of PSD files. So very, very powerful and popular with designers who use Photoshop. They don't need to write any code. You can create all the animation in Photoshop itself and click a button to create Corona SDK code, which runs beautifully. There is CPM, which is the Corona Project Manager, which is a paid application, which is a IDE to manage your projects. In addition to CPM, there is a CIDER, CIDER, as well as Corona Complete. So CPM, CIDER, Corona Complete, these are all full-blown IDEs which allow you to develop Lua and Corona SDK apps. Then there is Particle Candy, which is a professional effects library for your games. So if you want to simulate fire, rain, snow, etc. in your games, this is a very handy paid library to use. And there is Lime, which is a level editor created using the open source style. Coming towards the end of this presentation, and here are some of the good and the not so good experiences. On the good side, we have real fast productive development using Corona SDK. We have the ability to cater for multiple resolutions and device sizes. That lets the entire development team focus on creativity and content rather than the other mundane issues to do with device and OS fragmentation. But an excellent community of developers helping each other on the Corona forums. We have a lot of source code available for common patterns and popular apps. Not only that, if you are a licensed subscriber of the Corona SDK, then you receive daily builds with new features and capabilities added to the SDK. On the challenges side, we have differences in Android and iOS. So the code does not 100% behave exactly the same. There is 1 or 2% difference depending on where you're running the code. If you are looking for native UI look, as I said, it has challenges because the controls are not a part of the openGL library. They have a separate feature called as widgets, which are used to render controls on both the operating systems, and that's still a work in progress. It's not there yet. If you use the Corona SDK, obviously you are limited to what the SDK has to offer. If you're using native, then you can always use the latest and the greatest feature. When you're using the SDK, then you'll always be a few months behind the latest of what the company has to offer. Finally, the common challenges with apps is the marketing and the app discovery side. That's our personal experience that not everything you think is good is good. There are challenges in getting discovered. There are challenges in marketing your apps and dealing with the app economy in general. So those were some of the experiences which I wanted to share with the audience here. Finally, Red Byte Software has been using Corona SDK for the last 11 or 12 months. We are one of the first companies, we think, to embrace Corona SDK in India, and we have been chosen as the brand ambassadors for Corona SDK by Answer Mobile. We provide basic, advanced, and intermediate training on the SDK for app and game development, and we are also authorized to give you discounts to give Indian companies, Indian startups, Indian students, colleges, universities, discounts on the SDK licenses. So contact us at training@redbytes.in if you want to avail of these discounts. So thank you very much for attending the presentation. That's the end of my presentation. I'll be trying and answering the questions now. Can I start answering the questions?
Yeah, Mr. Rahmani, you can take up the questions now.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to read the question first. What is Corona? Where is it used? So Corona is a cross-platform SDK by Answer Mobile, and its strength lies in creating graphical apps and 2D games. So if you're trying to do graphical apps or if you're trying to do 2D games, Corona SDK is a very powerful SDK and you should seriously look into it. The major advantage being cross-platform deployment. So with one single code base, you will be on iOS and you will also be on Android. Not only that, the SDK takes care of content scaling, takes care of different resolutions, different device sizes. All that is built in with a simple configuration change. How is it different from Xcode? Xcode is an IDE provided by Apple to develop in the iOS environment. Xcode itself is not SDK. Xcode is an IDE. Corona is a SDK. It's not an IDE. Which is better, Corona or Xcode? So this is comparing apples to oranges. Corona is not the same as Xcode. But if you're trying to ask me which is better, developing native or developing using Corona, so there are pros and cons. Obviously, if you're developing for native, then you get absolute control. But you're limited to one platform. So if you decided that you want to become an iOS developer, and if you have the time, the inclination to learn Objective-C and be really good at it, then you should go the Xcode way. When your entire team has to learn Objective-C and work with Xcode, which will run only on Macs. It all depends. I know developers who are very happy just doing Objective-C and Xcode. But the learning curve for Xcode is very steep. So you have to spend 2-3 months probably. That too, until you have a C++ or /object-oriented background. If you want to get a fresher or somebody with 1 year experience with Objective-C, it is not everybody's cup of tea to learn Objective-C. Let me put it this way. But yes, you get absolute control. Once you master Objective-C, then I'm sure you'll be in Objective-C. But with Corona SDK, one, we get a easy to learn, easy to use, powerful SDK, and we get the ability to cross deploy on multiple platforms. Can we make all iOS apps using Corona SDK? I would say no, not 100%. Corona SDK shines at doing graphical apps, 2D games. So again, I'll give you examples. Kids' educational apps, comics, storybooks, games, rapid prototyping. This is where the SDK is really good at. But if you want a business app, a pure business app, there are multiple lists, a lot of data being fetched from web servers, and that kind of a thing. Use the standard UI controls provided by the OS. Then I would recommend going the native route. Although I should point out that there is something called as enterprise license for Corona SDK, wherein you can access some of the native functionalities. You can integrate third-party toolkits. That's some look at the enterprise Corona SDK license. Can we make books with curly animation, animated page effects? Can we make iBooks with a curly animated page effect? iBooks already has an author called iBooks Author. So if you're talking about purely iBooks, I would recommend using iBooks Author, but iBooks can only be sold in the US so far. So there are licensing restrictions with iBooks. If you're asking that you want to create an iBook-like application using Corona SDK, then the answer is yes. It is possible to create an iBook-like application. But you'll have to do everything in Lua and Corona SDK. You cannot get JavaScript into the mix. Curly animation is possible through using some effects. Curly animation is possible. It's not built into the SDK, but people have written code, and that code is all open source. Can we convert Xcode projects to Corona and vice versa? The answer is no. You cannot directly convert Xcode projects into Corona, and you cannot convert Corona projects into Xcode. How is the SDK 3D games? The SDK excels in creating 2D games, but I think the 3D, I'm not an expert on 3D, but if you create your characters in a separate 3D environment, like Maya or Unity or whatever, and then if you can export those 3D sprites into 2D, then you can use it and you can have some element of 3D within your games. If you ask me out of a scale of 1 to 10, I would say don't look at Corona SDK to do 3D games, because you won't get the real 3D. You'll get a 3D effect using 2D elements. That's possible, but you won't get a true 3D environment for doing games. So the answer is no. If iAd is not possible, but after native code created, we can write code for iAd. Am I correct? So the problem with iAd is an Apple advertising network. And because the Answer Mobile team is trying to do stuff which is cross-platform, obviously it cannot support something which is only Apple. So that's a challenge. If iAd not possible after native code, we can write code for it. Yeah, if you write native code, then obviously you can have an iAd integration. So if you truly want iAd, then you should go native. Next question. Are the Google APIs too considered third party here? So I do not understand this question. Not sure what we are trying to ask. Now, if the Google APIs, you mean if Google has an API which you can call using HTTP or HTTPS or a REST interface, then you can do that, because Corona SDK supports networking. Within networking, it supports asynchronous calls, synchronous calls. So you can call an API, you can get back the results in XML or JSON, and you can parse and you can process those results. So if you're talking about that, then that can be easily done. when I host a project in App Store, do I get paid and buying the SDK for $399 is for life, or do we have to pay for each and every application? For one, if you want to enroll into the Apple Developer Program, then you need to pay Apple a fee of $99 per year. So this is an annual fee. If you want to distribute anything on the App Store, you need to pay Apple $99 or $100 per year. In addition, the SDK cost, Corona SDK costs $349 for a dual license. So if you want a license wherein you want to deploy to both Android and iOS, then you have to pay $349. It's not $399, it's $349. And if you are in India, then you can get a discount from us. That license entitles you to create that as many applications in that year. So the validity of the license is 365 days. And in that 365 days, you can create thousands of applications. You won't have to pay again. But once the year ends, then you have to renew your license on an annual basis. You don't pay for each and every application, you pay on an annual basis. System requirements to install Corona trial version found on the website. If you are installing on Windows, then I think you need Java SDK 6 at the minimum. And if you are installing on Windows, then I think from Vista onwards, XP also supports XP, Vista, Windows 7, 2 to 4 GB RAM. I think these are available on the website. It's very, very standard requirement, nothing special required. Do we need a Mac to develop and test apps for iOS? Yes. If you want to test the app on a device, then you need to compile. If you want to compile for iOS, then you need a Mac. If you just want to simulate and see how the app looks on the iPad, you don't need a Mac for that. You can very well do that on a Windows machine. So Windows machine supports the simulator environment. But obviously, if you want to test on the device, then you need to compile. And to compile, you need the SDK installed locally, which means you need a Mac. So if you're doing iOS development, if you're just doing pure development and just looking at the results in the simulator, you can do it in Windows. But the moment you want to put it on a device, then you would need a Mac. Next question. Which technology is better to work in, Objective-C, Java, or Corona? So it's a very subjective question. I don't want to get into a big debate here. Every language and every technology has its own pros and cons. So you need to have a goal and you need to work towards that goal and you need to balance available skill sets, time you have to learn, years of experience you have, and what is your objective, and go that route. So no technology is good or bad. And at the end of the day, our users, app users, don't care. They don't give a hoot how you have developed your app, whether you have used Objective-C or Java or Corona. As long as you are solving a business problem or entertaining or giving them information and giving them in an easy to use manner and solving a problem for them, I think you've got a winner. So which technology is better to work? There's no better technology out there. It all depends. So sorry, I don't have a great answer for this. How one can see his future in Corona? Okay, so Corona SDK is not a very popular SDK, especially in India, but there's a lot of developers in the US, UK, etc. If you go to ELANs and if you go to other of these sites, there are people asking for Corona SDK skills. Now, if you want to look for a future, you should look, if you're into the gaming industry or if you are into learning or graphical in a space where graphics are required, then I think Corona is a good bet as far as the mobile industry is concerned. It's fast, it's easy to develop, etc. If you're looking to work for somebody, especially in India, then there's not much awareness about Corona SDK in India, something that we are trying to change. So then, if you're looking from a career perspective, and if you're looking at opportunities, and if you want to be in India, then you're better off doing Objective-C or Android, because then looking at career, you'll be mostly looking at enterprises. Whereas if you're looking at gaming or graphical, then not much work is done in India anyways. So it's Right now, also because it's not very popular, from a career perspective, probably not. But if you're a startup, or if you have a good idea for a game, or a kids app, or a storybook, then I think this is one of the most productive platforms to realize your dreams in. How much discount can you or your organization give on the license of this SDK? So it depends on the number of licenses. If you're just talking about one license, then we can give up to 20%. If you're ordering in 5 or multiples of 5, then we can definitely talk. Is it possible to develop apps using C++? Next question. No. With Corona SDK, you have to develop in Lua. Next question. License is one-time cost or 1 year? License is the annual cost, which has to be renewed. So $349 for both platforms, or $149 for just one single platform. So if you just want to target Android, for example, then you just pay $149. Next question. Hello sir, while programming, all the images in main.lua have to be saved on a separate folder, and where this folder has to be saved. So you can have a folder almost anywhere in your file system. Within that folder, you can keep all the files in the root folder, and you should go for Android as well as for iOS. iOS supports subfolders within your main folder, while Android does not necessarily support subfolders. There have been reported problems with Android if you have subfolders. So to be safe, just have one root folder and have all your assets and .lua files within that folder. This folder can be saved anywhere on your machine. Next question. Does it support 3D game development? No, it does not support 3D game development. You can simulate 3D by using 2D techniques, but it does not have direct support for 3D. Next question. Can I submit iPhone app to Apple App Store from Windows developed by Corona? Can I submit iPhone app to Apple App Store from Windows? No. You cannot submit iPhone app to Apple App Store from Windows developed by Corona. You would need to be on a Mac to compile and to get the binary and to upload the binary developed by Corona. There is no shortcut. You need a Mac. To develop a simple, next question. To develop a simple gaming application in Corona for Android, what should I learn? So obviously it depends how simple your game is. You go to the Corona SDK website. It's called coronalabs.com. It has got the complete documentation, all the APIs, number of videos. In fact, one of the websites which I want to strongly recommend to everyone here who wants to learn Corona SDK is also learningcorona.com. So you go to learningcorona.com, it's an aggregated list of all the links you require to learn Corona. And if you are very good in programming in logic, and if you know any language like C# or Java, then I think 2 weeks is the maximum you need to understand all the features and all the APIs of Corona SDK. So extremely easy to learn. You should be up and running in 2 weeks. Can this SDK, next question, can this SDK be used in Eclipse IDE? I think the answer is yes. I haven't used it before, but I think you can integrate it into Eclipse IDE. I've read on the forums, some people have done this. There is support for Eclipse. I'm not 100% sure, but I think the answer is yes. Does it provide direct access to openGL library? No, you still have to go through the SDK to access the openGL. It does not provide access to openGL library directly. Although one needs to check the enterprise license and what it provides. I'm not an expert on the enterprise version of Corona, and that has some nifty low levels you can do. So that is to be checked. I'm not 100% sure. If I have a trial version, in how much time will my, next question. If I have a trial version, how much time will my code get compiled? And since the code is not compiled locally, how is it compiled? If you're using a trial version, it will take less than a minute to get your code compiled, generally, as a rule of thumb. It all depends on the size of your code and what kind of assets you have used in your app. Trial users have to go through a queue to compile the apps, whereas licensed users, the server and the queue is much shorter and they get the priority. But I don't think we have waited for more than a minute or minute and a half to compile the biggest of our apps. But it all depends on how big your app is. Sorry. And the way it is compiled, all your assets, your images and your Lua files are sent to the server. They are processed and you get back, for Android, you get back a .apk file. And for iOS, you get back a IPA file. Or a .app file, .app file. Next, does Corona SDK work for developing apps on platforms other than Android? Android and iOS, these are the two supported platforms today. If you look at the Corona SDK roadmap, the next platform to be introduced would be the Mac. So you could write one code and you could do iOS, Android and the Mac. There's a requirement to be able to build on Windows. That's something which Answer Mobile hasn't promised yet. Next question. My Android app will work on all resolution with one image, or do I need to create different images for different resolution? Very good question. You could do either. So you could target the highest resolution you are targeting from a resolution perspective. And you could set the content scaling parameters wherein with configuration you could actually mention how you want your images to be scaled when they are rendered on a device which has lesser resolution than the one you originally developed against. So you could do that, which is called scaling down. So you design and develop for the highest resolution and you ask the Corona SDK to scale down your images automatically. Or for every resolution you support, you can create different sets of assets. So both the ways are supported. Obviously, if you create different sets of images for different resolutions, then your app size is considerably higher. Whereas if you have one single set of images for the highest resolution, then on lower resolution devices you would be using additional memory which you don't need to use. So again, it's a balancing act. Depends on what your target audience is, what resolutions are you willing to support, how big is your app, how many images are we talking about. So you need to balance between size of the app and the memory limitations of the device where your app will be used. Here at Red Bytes, we have some apps developed wherein we have only one set of images and it works across. And in some apps, we have actually done different set of images. Next question, can you make isometric games using Corona SDK? Yes, possible. There are many examples of that. If you look at Lime, Lime is a tool which lets you play with isometric maps. You could create games. You can then bring that into Corona. So you use a different level editor, you use a different graphics creator, and then you can integrate all of that into Corona. Next question, what about crashing issue which normally all Android device is facing in all game engine? I do not understand this. This question. Crashes are caused by a number of reasons. It could be your application misbehaving, it could be memory not released, it could be a number of other factors. So I'm not sure about the cause of this crash. That's a general question. It's nothing to do with Corona SDK. You can write rock solid applications with Corona SDK. Next question, is knowledge of only one programming language enough? With Corona SDK, the answer is yes. Just need to know Lua and the Corona SDK APIs and you should be all set. Next, what is the renewal charges after 1 year? It's the same. There's no special discount for renewal, it's the same charge. Can I get books? Next question, can I get books on this SDK? Let me know the good titles. Yes, there are 2 or 3 books on the Corona SDK. Simple search on Amazon or Google will show you the titles. There is a book by Dr. Burton, Dr. Richard Burton, which is a starter book. He's also writing an advanced book on it. And there's another book and a number of videos. So again, to learn this SDK, I would highly recommend the Answer Mobile documentation and learningcorona.com. Okay, last questions. For developing Android applications and hosting it on Google Play, is Java and Corona SDK enough? Well, if you simply want to develop Android applications using Corona SDK, then you don't need to know Java. And if you want to do native Android applications, then you need to know Java. So yeah, Java is enough to create native Android applications. And with Corona SDK, you could create an application and deploy it in both platforms. So that was the end of the questions. If anyone wants to have an offline discussion, then I'm more than happy. I'm sure my details will be passed on by the organizer of this event. So I'm more than happy if you just want to call me or send me an email. My Facebook is Altaf R. So feel free to friend me on Facebook. I'll be more than happy to answer questions after that. Over to you, Rohini. Over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Rahmani, for your session on graphical app development using Corona SDK. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for the support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this webinar will be available on techig.com by tomorrow. Thank you and have a nice day.